Way back in the misty past of 1987, a little show called Star Trek The Next Generation hit TVs. It became a runaway success, which isn't particularly surprising when the original series upon which it was based had the unusual honor of remaining in the public consciousness for 2 decades and spawning multiple films. For the suits behind the new show, a successful continuation of an already established IP leads to an obvious and predictable question: how can we milk this cash cow for all it's worth? The answer, as well as continuing to make more films, was to launch another show. Just doing the same again would risk audience apathy at best or unfavorable comparisons at worst, so that means something a bit different. The answer is a change of direction, or more accurately, to not be going in any direction at all. A permanent installation provides a new setting, and that means a new approach. The original series and The Next Generation being set on ships meant that, whether the story went well or poorly for us, we could just bugger off at the end of it and not look back. Such an approach was obviously not going to work for a static station. We can still occasionally do episodes like that, of course, with visitors to the station bringing their stories with them, but an entirely new species flying through every single week just isn't realistic. Not everybody's as interested in exploring as we are. And that means a change of focus. The previous approach of a new interesting thing each week is, by necessity, replaced with a greater emphasis on continuation and consequences. Such a focus makes fertile ground for politics, intrigue, and character building. We lean into this from the very off with a darker and more gritty experience, not just by opening with the death of our main character's wife and how he deals with that, but the very setting of the show itself. This is no gleamingly clean and comfortable Starfleet ship. Terok Nor is a Cardigan forced labor satellite where the native Bajoran population were worked until they died. It's a place where atrocities were committed during a half-century-long enslavement of an entire world. And that local world, one trying to climb its way out of imposed destitution, becomes a core theme in a number of ways. We have not only the fluid political situation that often follows the overthrow of an oppressor, but also how their religion ties into both their survival during the occupation and the discovery we make shortly after arriving. During the 50 years of the occupation, their religion became a source of strength to Bajorans, a belief that Bajor was watched over by the prophets in their celestial temple. It's into this background of faith that Sisko, the new commander of this now Federation-run station, enters. The pilot shows him being revealed as the emissary of the prophets by Bajor's religious leader, and him finding a wormhole in which some aliens the Bajorans believe to be their gods live. You could see this as the reward for decades of faith, a confirmation that they were right to venerate the prophets despite their hardships, but it sets up a source of friction within the Bajoran people as well. Many were opposed to the idea of accepting help from the Federation, seeing it as another form of rule. Having the face of that new administration be not only declared a central part of their faith, but also prove it through discovering the home of the prophets, leaves people like Kira, his Bajoran second-in-command, feeling very conflicted indeed on the topic. It also leaves Sisko himself straining against a label he doesn't want for a faith he doesn't share. Watching both come to terms with these things will be a long-running thread of the show. In fact, a commitment to how the setting and its characters change over time is one of Deep Space Nine's greatest strengths. In addition to how the main cast grow and adapt to the situation they're in, Bajor itself changes over time. And just as Kira struggles to adapt from freedom fighter to diplomatic liaison, the rebirth of Bajor isn't entirely painless either. And this is where we touch on another of the strengths Deep Space Nine has, the quality of its antagonists. I'm a big proponent of the idea that the best way to elevate a story is with a truly memorable bastard. We get multiple. Vedek Sin, the Delphic douchebag, is a conservative religious leader who'll do whatever's necessary to further her own power. Seagull Dukat is an arrogant egotist, sure in the knowledge that he's not only destined for greatness, but utterly deserves it as well. Uncle Wayoon the Creepy is a manipulative sadist who rules through lies and fear. What makes them all truly memorable is that none of them considers themselves evil. Vedek Sin's desire to become Kai, and subsequent abuse of that power once she achieves it, is done in the belief that she genuinely does know what's best for Bajor and its people. Sigel Dukat is convinced of Cardassia's superiority and knows with absolute certainty that other species would be much happier if they just accepted the lessons of their betters. Uncle Weyoun considers any and all actions mere extensions of the will of his gods, the only true crime being to fail them. Part of the reason why Sigel Dukat in particular is an excellent bastard is perhaps because the actor himself, Mark Alaimo, personally believed he was misunderstood and wanted him to secretly be the hero right up until the end. How much of what we now see as egotism and a sociopathic lack of empathy are due to the actor sharing precisely the same points of view as their character? This entirely coincidental alignment makes him one of the most delightful bastards of not just Star Trek, but in my opinion, any TV show ever made. The best baddies are not pure danger distilled, not monsters to overwhelm, not an unknowable alien force. They are nuanced, insidious, self-serving, persuasive. Evil is mundane. Evil drinks coffee in between casualty estimates for their latest offensive. Evil invites you to dinner while committing genocide. Evil rationalizes its actions and wants you to understand why it was necessary as well. Evil never, ever believes it is evil, either through applying a veneer of duty or arguing their victims had somehow deserved it, or telling themselves everybody else would do the same if they were given the chance. The antagonists are just one facet of a larger strength for DS9 though, its wealth of recurring characters. Be they family or friends, threats or mysteries, this library of supporting cast members gave the series a sense of growth and progression. It also meant we could keep a number of different plots on the slow boil at any given time and bring them back at regular intervals without overloading the main cast or the audience. The power struggle of a newly freed Bajor, Cardassia's fall, rise, and fall again, the Maquis and how Federation border worlds were treated, Ferenginar and its own societal changes, the Dominion threat and eventual hostilities, the Klingon Empire's problematic leadership. Each of these threads brought recurring characters back again and again, allowing us to keep the feeling of continuation along multiple lines without any one topic becoming stagnant from overexposure. Through either chance or skill, these individual strengths of a darker outlook, a wide supporting cast, and multiple long-running storylines created something that was greater than the sum of their parts. Which, ironically, was also a problem. When you've got a new entry to a long-running franchise, one with a proven formula, it's understandable that you'd want to continue using it. The Trek formula to date was one of largely isolated stories, with interwoven or continuing plots being the exception rather than the rule. All well and good when you're applying that formula to the same base template, but Deep Space Nine was not an exploring ship. Once the show had found its own voice, trying to use the time-honoured Trek approach resulted in the occasions when it felt least like itself. Season 6 featured a couple of scripts that were originally pitched for TNG, and their adherence to the template of have a science problem, solve the science problem feels out of place for a show that by this point had fully embraced the more serious aspects of politicking and schemes. It's not the only misstep of the show either. Deep Space Nine wanted to lean further into the more unpleasant aspects of Federation life to take the shine off our apparent utopia. One of the ways it did this was with the treatment of Federation colonies after the war with Cardassia. The agreement to form a demilitarized zone resulted in a number of settlements changing hands, and this wasn't well received by those involved. Many viewers, and a number of people in the comments of videos on these topics, can't understand why this would be the case. The affected settlers were offered a new home with comparable existence after all, everything they lost replaced. To understand why this is not the favourable offer it sounds like requires understanding the basics of Federation life itself. The Federation is a post-scarcity society. A person's needs are met in abundance, with material property being something you can call up at will using replicators. Whilst financial systems are not prohibited, they're also not the standard, and Earth has largely moved beyond currency. The basic standard of life is very pleasant indeed. With a move away from material wealth as necessity or form of measuring achievement, people were freed to do as they pleased. The betterment of the self and society in general became the focus, and personal agency placed paramount. In short, our entire sense of self-worth was detached from physical items or financial accrual and aimed at the choices we make instead. Some people used that personal agency to sod off and set up colonies elsewhere, the desire to found and build a community with like-minded individuals being their choice. And that's why the offer to simply replace those homes was irrelevant. These people had already rejected easy lives to create something themselves. When the Federation signed over those planets, they didn't simply inconvenience the people who lived there. They robbed them of the single most precious thing citizens of the Federation have, the freedom to choose. The Maquis come into existence because the Federation has proven it will sacrifice those on the fringes to keep the core safe. We have a number of episodes showing just how shafted these people got by the Federation, explaining how the organization that so strongly claims to value autonomy will overrule it for convenience. It's a great setup, and one that shows a significant flaw in the Federation's thinking, which is why I was so disappointed when the whole thing was swept away, because it had become too complicated. Just like the Federation itself, the writers decided one day that they had too many plates spinning, and let the question of DMZ colonies be the one that smashes to the floor. It's doubly disappointing because Eddington, the former Starfleet officer turned Maquis leader, hits upon a potentially fascinating point. He says the Federation abandoned those colonies because they were offended by the idea that anybody would choose to not live in utopia. And that sets up a similarity to something we've discussed before, the idea that Vulcans can revere logic so much that their own attitudes can themselves become illogical, taking personal offense at anybody who exhibits emotion. The same thinking could be applied here. Our Federation utopia applies the highest value on personal agency, therefore anybody who uses that personal agency to leave our utopia must be wrong. Just like some Vulcans, the offense taken at others not following the same path as you impacts the very thing you claim to be paramount. I personally feel there was a lot more mileage in the Maquis storyline, and significant opportunities to examine how the Federation treats those who simply don't fit in to what it considers advanced civilization. The final oversight of Deep Space Nine, in my opinion, is the underutilization of Jake as a character. To be clear, the relationship between Sisko and his son Jake is generally portrayed as a very healthy one. Indeed, the two of them regularly showing physical affection is one of the positives of the show. It's a pleasing counterpoint to the standard awkwardness between father and son seen on TV, the idea that a man expressing love for his children is simply not done. For as positive as that representation is, we don't see how this whole thing is affecting Jake as much as we perhaps should. There are logistical reasons for that, of course, such as labour laws surrounding how long minors can be on set when filming, but those stop being applicable during the later seasons. More than this, though, I think one of the greatest missed opportunities is in failing to address how Sisko's status as the emissary, and then learning he's part prophet, affects Jake. We simply don't discuss it at all, which is a little odd when you think about it. Jake is the son of one of the most revered figures in Bajoran religion, and that's before we know he's got literal god lineage. How does that affect the way Bajorans treat Jake? Is it something that should have been taken into account during romantic pairings, for example? He's had 3 Bajoran girlfriends, to our knowledge. Was that just down to his charm and Bajorans being the most common species on the station, or is there more to it? These are questions we never ask, and the depth of Jake as a character suffers because of it. Alright, fine. This is a series summary, so that means we have to do a top and bottom episode list. We're on YouTube, remember, which means whatever I say is objectively correct and definitely not a matter of opinion. There's no need to rush to the comments. Duet had no right to be as good as it was. It only exists because they needed a so-called bottle episode, a story containing little to no financial outlay beyond the necessities. What we got was not only one of the best stories in DS9, but in Trek as a whole. It deals with guilt and shame, hate and forgiveness, and appends what we thought we knew about Bajor's oppressors. That it also had one of the finest performances from a guest star probably didn't hurt either. The two-part story of improbable cause and the Dyer's cast is rich with so much to take away. The additional background of plain simple Garak and the conflict he feels with the price to end his exile, learning that Starfleet will give only token objections to atrocities if they're in our interests, establishing the Founders as far more capable than previously thought. It's not only a superb story in its own right, it also sets up a lot of things we'll be seeing more of later. Regulars to the channel will know I don't have a lot of patience for time-fuckery stories. It's a sign of just how good The Visitor is then that it features in my top 5. A lot of that is down to Tony Todd's performance, but it's also an exploration of how loss without closure can affect a person long after the event. You won't see The Quickening on many top 5 lists, but it's one that stayed with me since it first aired when I was younger. Bashir's failure shows us he's fully conscious of the arrogance and egotism born of his exceptional skills, and utterly directionless when that's not enough. It's the episode I always think of to explain how making a character less than a perfect hero can allow them to become far more. This one's hardly a surprise, is it? In the Pale Moonlight has politics, schemes, deceit, twists, ethics, and a character brought low. Watching Sisko realize he's willing to do all of the things he's previously railed against in Admirals is a complete delight. In short, it was written purely for me. Some honourable mentions that didn't quite make the cut are The Forsaken for taking Lwaxana Troi, a character many people consider annoying, and showing her depths of compassion and insight. Dr. Bashir, I presume, for showing how a well-crafted retcon can reframe everything that came before it. It's only a Paper Moon for being brave enough to hand the reins over to supporting cast for a very heavy topic indeed. You can't have a top 5 without putting the boot in as well, so here's your catalogue of errors. Body swap shenanigans are a well-trodden sci-fi staple, and The Passenger does nothing new with it. The reveal is spoiled early on by a pretty recognizable off-screen voice. Alexander Siddig's performance is by his own admission pretty dire, which isn't particularly surprising when he only got the script a single day before filming, and the whole thing feels utterly half-assed. Profit and loss is what happens when somebody takes a classic and just tries to paste it over a new setting. Deep Space Nine's attempt at Space Casablanca fails on a number of levels, from the utter lack of chemistry between the leads to a complete mismatch between Quark's established character and current actions to some of the worst dialogue in the whole series. Space Vampire MILF preys on teen boy should tell you all you need to know about the Muse, an otherwise subpar story dragged down even further by a fascinatingly wrong-headed decision to sexualize it. If there's one thing worse than a shit episode, it's a shit episode that had potential. Looking at the way Ferengi treat females in Prophet and Lace could have been worthwhile. Unfortunately, we do it by just straight-up parroting the very misogyny we're supposed to be commenting upon. Its only redeeming feature is the knowledge that it could have been even worse if Armin Shimmerman hadn't spoken up. The concept of returning to the mirror universe from the original series was an interesting one, and to begin with. 7 seasons in, and any potential for reflection had been sucked dry, replaced with predictable plot points played for laughs. The Emperor's new cloak serves only as an example of what happens when you beat an idea to death. Those 5 turds are enough to fill the bowl, but we'll give dishonourable mentions too. Melora for taking a story about how people with disabilities just want an even playing field and turning it into one where she's the problem. Meridian for presenting entirely the opposite of what we were told Dax is, and treating fake sexual imagery as a joke to boot. Let he who is without sin for Worf doing jealousy terrorism, then as all just pretending it didn't happen and moving on. Before we ourselves move on, you'll note Move Along Home wasn't in that list. At the risk of starting a tradition after doing the same with Threshold on Voyager, I've got to tell you I didn't actually hate it. Not for the story, of course, as that's utter arse, but because of what it tells us about Quark. This is the episode where we see Quark won't put personal gain above everything else. He's genuinely upset at the thought of having to choose someone in the game to be removed, the implication being they'll die. Just as Threshold was the first real insight into Tom Paris, Move Along Home is the first real insight into Quark. For that alone, it avoids the shit list. Deep Space Nine is ultimately the story about how writers wanted to do something different with the Trek template and, often in the face of studio pushback, succeeded in giving a different feel to the familiar. It was judged by executives at the time as a failure, a judgment based entirely on ratings and arguably affected by reasons outside of its own control. At least some of that was caused by its broadcast slot jumping all over the place in syndicate schedules. Despite this, it's become the pinnacle of old Trek in the minds of many. The switch to a more serialized approach, something argued against by those same executives, allowed it to provide depth not seen in any of the other old Trek shows. It's fascinating to think that what many now think of as peak Trek might never have happened. Majel Barrett is on record saying Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, would have disapproved of DS9 becoming a war story. Now, we're not going to dip into this particular argument of whether Roddenberry would have approved of the show at all, because that's a debate with no answer beyond hearsay. It's also worth mentioning that Trek royalty D.C. Fontana thought he'd have actually approved of it. If you bother to analyse the stories behind the explosions, Deep Space Nine is a distinctly anti-war message. In The Pale Moonlight and The Siege of AR-558 show that war is a dirty and awful business, something to be avoided unless absolutely necessary, and it makes all of those involved less than they were before. These were deliberate choices by those behind the scenes, some of whom either had relatives who'd fought in World War II or had themselves fought in Vietnam. Deep Space Nine is not a glorification of conflict, it's a warning. That's not really the point, though. The point is that people who claimed they were speaking on behalf of what Trek should or should not be could have derailed this entire thing by arguing it was in some way impure. But it was only by going against these expectations, by doing something the Next Generation and the original series didn't do, that we got what is considered by many to be not only the strongest series, but the one that's still the most relevant now. There are some very vocal people who say new Trek shows and films should not exist because they don't adhere to the principles of X, Y, or Z. I won't say these voices are the majority because, if they were, there'd be no show to complain about. Discovery wouldn't have 5 seasons if nobody had been watching it. Whatever you think of them, you can't deny their success. More than that, though, the entire underlying argument is flawed, and Deep Space Nine itself is the perfect rebuttal. It was dark in ways we'd not seen previously. Things were ethically dubious with alarming regularity. The main character's an accomplice to murder, for fuck's sake. Say what you like about various entries of New Trek not being to your tastes, there are plenty of aspects I personally don't care for either. But calling for them to be outright forbidden, directions in which Trek should never go, is the same thinking that could have robbed us of this very series. Deep Space Nine is proof that Trek is at its best when it pushes established boundaries. The whole point is for us to go where no one has gone before. That we'd be taken there by a show set on a static space station is just another example of why there's no right way to do Trek. And that, my friends, is Deep Space Nine well and truly done. If you're still not sick of my voice, we'll be doing it all over again with Enterprise, with the pilot episode planned to appear on Monday the 23rd of February. As ever, this whole thing is possible because of our channel's generous patrons. Their names are on screen now, and yours can be too if you pop over to patreon.com/USSpedant and throw a coin at me. To them and the rest of you, I hope you enjoy your shore leave, and I'll see you all in a couple of weeks when we'll strip down to our pants and start smearing each other in medical goo. For science, obviously.